I don't know, Doc. I can't explain it. I'm not excited about reviewing the Sony A99 II. I don't know why. I feel like I should be. I just can't get there.
Now, Chris, I just want to remind you that the A99 II is the best spec'd full-frame camera in the world right now, so let's just keep that in mind moving forward.
I know, on paper, it's such an amazing product. 42 megapixels for landscape, 12 frames per second, and that's never been combined before. And then you throw in the amazing video. It's so much camera. Maybe I feel like I don't deserve this much camera. Oh yeah, I think I'm onto something, because maybe it's the A mount that I have a problem with. Like, Sony's making such a powerful camera in a mount that they could just abandon any moment.
Chris, stop right there. I mean, the abandonment...
Maybe this has nothing to do with Sony abandoning the A mount, but more to do with my own personal abandonment issues. In which case, I shouldn't blame the Sony, but rather my father. I think I figured out, Doc. You're the best. Thanks. I'm gonna go do this review.
Chris, before you leave, you're overdue on your bills and you owe me thousands of...
All right, TCS TV viewers, Chris Niccolls here again. And with some good counseling and a lot of introspection, I have decided I'm happy to review the Sony A99 II now. And it's a very powerful camera, but with a lot of stuff that we've already seen, just all put together. I want to test this camera out. We've already got some dynamic range landscapes that we've shot for you. One of our coworkers, Ken Locke, very talented portrait photographer, did some studio work with this camera, and I'm very excited about our AF test coming up next. Now for this test, we tried to look around Calgary and see if there's any big sporting events, but we couldn't find anything. So we've got this skating rink here, and luckily Jordan Drake, your video expert, is actually a 2007 Stars on Ice champion. That's a lie, actually. He hasn't skated in a couple years. He was never very good to start with, but he's going to be a sport and he's going to do this for us. So please, online community, be gentle with Jordan on this one, okay? I am excited though to test out the AF, because you got to remember that the A99 II, being an SLT camera, it's very fast shooting and very stable shooting, and now we couple that with 42 megapixels, a strong buffer. This is going to be our first test, and I'm excited to try it out. I'm going to hold it here, although a monopod would have been nice. Whew. So I'm just using center zone here. I've got Jordan going away from me. Here he comes. Oh, it lost it there. So buffer in RAW and JPEG is not great. I mean, I'm getting maybe 10 or 12 frames, but that makes sense. They're such big files. So I'm going to switch over now to JPEG and see if I can get it that way much faster. Now, I mean, one thing I will say about this camera, the processing power is fantastic. I'm taking shots here, but it takes a long time to actually write to the cards. And one of our complaints about this camera, although we do have a UHS 1 and 2 port on here, it would be really nice to have an XQD card in here. I mean, this is the kind of camera that could really utilize a fast architecture like that.
One thing I will say I really love about the A99 II is the swivel screen on it, because I can get a full selfie with it right now. I also really love the 5-axis stabilizer that also works in video, taking out some of the jitters on this. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a GoPro is still a bit more practical, but this is a nice alternative.
So we shot a whole bunch of autofocus tests here on the A99 II just to really give it a good kind of, field test and see what it's like, and I am very impressed. I mean, first off, the buffer, 50 shots or so in JPEG, 8 to 10 shots with RAW plus JPEG. I mean, regardless, that's impressive. And the only thing that really lets me down is how long you have to wait to get that card to clear to shoot again. But otherwise, super impressive. Autofocus was tenacious. It held on whether I did zone focusing or center field. It was great in the wide aspect as well. Followed Jordan really well, even up close. I was impressed. You might say, okay, well, maybe I've got A-mount glass. Should I just get an A7R Mark II with an LEA3? That is great that it's an option, but this is still going to be better. So if you're doing any sort of sports, action journalism, and you want to use A-mount glass, I do think that this platform is definitely worthwhile. Now, I have to say, I was also very impressed using the 300 2.8, the 24 to 70 Zeiss lens. It all performed very well, but I do want to make a note that This is all modern glass, and I know a lot of people are going to say, hey, one of the great things about A-mount is you can get old Minolta lenses or early alpha mount lenses. And you can, but keep in mind the autofocusing speed and capability is fairly dependent on the modernity of the lens. So just keep that in mind. I mean, if you're ready to spend $9 on a brand new 300 2.8, go for it. You'll be very impressed with the focusing capability. But if you're looking to make the old Minolta stuff focus as quick, it's just not quite going to do it. Now the Sony A99 Mark II might very well be Sony's last SLT camera in the A-mount series. In fact, it might just be Sony's last A-mount camera of all time. We don't know, but it feels like a distinct possibility. But before I go further, I should probably explain what an SLT camera is, just in case you don't know. So basically, this is very similar to an SLR, except it has a semi-translucent mirror. It doesn't flap up and down like a regular SLR to get out of the way to let the light go through and hit the sensor. In fact, here the light's always going through and hitting the sensor. That's where your EVF comes from. And a very small portion of the light is bounced off of this translucent mirror and up into the top where it can then focus. So it's a very unique system. It speeds up the camera quite a bit, eliminates any sort of possibility of mirror slap, and just makes this an altogether unique kind of camera kit. Now, of course, if there's a little bit of light being deflected up to the AF sensors, that means that light's not going to reach the image sensor itself. And so, yeah, you're not getting as much light. You're losing about 1/3 of a stop. Now, to be fair, it's not a big deal on this new camera. When these first came out back in the day with the early SLT cameras, you did have an issue because sensors weren't as good at high ISO and you needed every ounce of light to focus properly. But now we've got the flagship sensor in here, 42 megapixels, just like you'd find in the A7R Mark II, and we've got lots of ISO performance to give, and the focusing is brand new. So no real issue. You're not really going to miss that third stop of light. So we do have a brand new focusing system and processing engine that gives us very, very fast focusing, also pushing the frame rate up to 12 frames per second. When you consider that it's doing that at 42 megapixels, that's a pretty amazing achievement. Now on top of that, this flagship sensor is going to give you tons of detail and resolution, excellent ISO performance, and overall a very SLR-like, rugged, weather-sealed, and familiar body design. It's got an excellent grip, and as much as I complained about how heavy these cameras were compared to a mirrorless camera, compared to your classic SLR, they're right on par. Now this is not new, the A99 had this as well, but this rotating screen is always excellent. I mean, I think nowadays we kind of take it for granted as a feature, but if I'm trying to get low to the ground and just get some foreground material here like this, and take my shot, it's just nice to have a screen like that. But that being said, there's lots of kinds of rotating screens on the market, and the A99 Mark II really does have an incredibly capable one. I mean, this is probably your most full-featured rotating screen. I mean, you can do selfies from above or below. I mean, any sort of angle, shooting around corners. I mean, this is really quite a flexible design, and that's always been a nice benefit. I haven't ever seen another one like it on another camera. Keep those highlights nice and safe. And again, on the A99 Mark II, I know I'm going to get good dynamic range. It's excellent that I can have live histogram for this kind of stuff, which will really set this apart from a classic SLR. Of course, you know, the body is very similar, but I love having that live histogram. And on top of that, I've decided maybe I'll just start selling multi-million-dollar homes as a real estate agent, right? It's a good idea. So in terms of handling, I'm going to start with what I liked about the camera. I mean, it is a nice feeling camera. It's got a good grip to it, lots of customizable buttons. I like Sony's classic FN quick menu. You can customize that as well. Also here, this is a customizable selector switch by default for autofocus, but you can set it to other things. And I like that you can set a click on there or turn it off and have it nice and smooth. No pop-up flash. I mean, you know, it's handy to have, but you're not going to miss it too much. They look terrible to use. But there's also a lot of stuff that I didn't like about this body, and it's the stuff that I actually didn't like about its predecessor, and I think that's a big part of why I was so hard on this camera in the first place. Now, my problem with this camera basically boils down to a series of delays, you know, a very laggy interface in a lot of cases. Now, first off, this one's not so critical, but the EVF, when I bring it up to my eye, it takes just long enough before it kicks in to kind of distract me, okay? It would never hurt me in a practical situation, but I do find it distracting. Now that being said, when it comes to the lag that you get when you're changing things as simple as aperture or ISO with the dials, that's a real problem. You literally have to turn the dial and then wait for things to catch up. Now by that point, I don't know if I've gone too far or not far enough. I've got to wait for it, and I'm losing any confidence I'm going to be able to shoot quickly. ISO as well is a problem. As I change my ISO and turn the dial, one click can be a whole full stop of change. It's so hard to get any sort of precision. And so I'm going to be relying on things more like the quick menu, and that's fine. But then it brings me to this joystick interface on the back. Moving this up and down, left and right, sometimes I'm feeling feeling that's not going in the right direction, and I don't have just classic up, down, left, right buttons to default back to, and I really wish I had that, because when push comes to shove, if you get frustrated here, you're going to miss some shots. So we've got this nice beautiful light out here, and this does give us a good opportunity to talk about dynamic range. We did some tests this morning, we're out here again shooting, and I mean, it's a known commodity. This chip, the 42 megapixel, is fantastic with dynamic range. You got lots of flexibility. We've done a lot of tests here where we're pulling down highlights and bringing up shadows, and one thing that's so nice about this particular chip is it doesn't seem to really have a preference either way. So even if you have to really push it in both directions, you can recover from both ends, and it does help us out with really, really nice light like we're dealing with right now. So if you're doing landscape photography, this camera is going to be excellent. It's rugged, it's got a great sensor. And if you're going to do sports and journalism, this is probably one of Sony's best and most exciting fast shooting cameras on the market right now. But you might also want to use this in the studio to get that beautiful resolution for big prints and detail. And for that, we're going to Ken Locke. And what we're really excited about with Ken's work is he's actually been using SLT and A-mount cameras for many, many, many years in the studio. All right, TCS-TV viewers, we got a treat for you here, because this is Ken Locke. Ken Locke works at the store, but he is also very unique because he's probably the only Sony A-mount studio photographer that I know of. Possibly the only A-mount studio photographer in the world.
There are others.
I don't think so. I think you're the only one.
Yeah.
And you used an A99, but you switched over to mirrorless, right? You
Yes.
switched over to mirrorless.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And why is that?
Well, it's just more compact.
Right.
I find that I use less and less the more I do this, and more efficiently. And so I wanted something that was a little more compact. Getting old.
You've pulled away from that, but you still use Minolta glass and A-mount
Yeah.
glass, right? Because you like the look of it.
I do.
So then going to the A99 Mark II, which you tried,
Yes.
what were the differences?
For a studio experience, when you have a limited time and you want to get the shots and pop, 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 and be really efficient with it, I found that it focused really quick. And, I like to do sort of double tap shooting, I take one and take one.
Right.
Then, so it was doing a really good job with that.
Yeah, like your style is less like on a tripod, posing.
yeah.
It's really more
It's-
like improv, like you're trying to talk to them, communicate with them.
Yeah, a lot of movement, a lot of, crouching down, standing up,
Right.
people jumping,
Yeah, right,
moving and stuff. So I found that it captured all of that really well.
Okay, and the files, what do you think about the files?
The files were obviously bigger.
Yeah.
But I didn't find that in the writing capability of the camera. You never experience that at all.
Like no slowdown at all?
No slowdown at all.
Right.
At 42 megapixels at 12 frames per second, I believe, it doesn't slow down.
Will only people who already have A-mount lenses buy this camera, or do you see other people saying like, oh, this is an important tool for what I want to do? Honestly.
I don't think that I can say that nobody will do that. Maybe somebody will do that. I think
Right.
the majority of people who buy this camera have been in this system for a while, already own alpha glass, and then this is something that takes them a little bit step further. I find people will either upgrade what they already have to this camera,
Right.
or make the switch to the mirrorless,
Yeah.
because the mirrorless is the future.
Sure. I agree. We appreciate you doing the shots for us.
It was my pleasure.
And I like you like a little bit more.
More.
Yeah.
Increments.
Yeah,
Increments.
baby steps.
Baby steps.
Baby steps.
Very baby steps.
Hey guys, it's Jordan to talk about video on the A99 II, and honestly it's pretty easy to do because so much of its functionality is kind of directly inherited from the A7R II. Now to start off with, we've got the option to record 4K in both full frame and Super 35 modes. But 1080 as well, we've got 120 frames per second, and you can see here quality is actually quite respectable on that. Now, one major issue I had with the A7R II that this is kind of based on is when you were shooting in the full frame mode, the quality was nowhere near as good as it was in the Super 35 mode. Low light was much worse, sharpness had a big drop off, and I'm actually seeing it's quite a bit better on the A99 II. Now, I think that's really due to a different processor, the same thing that's pushing through those giant 42 megapixel still files. It seems to be doing a much better job, but you are still getting sharper images if you use the Super 35 mode. So that's ideally where you're going to want to shoot this. In terms of the body, I actually found it works quite well. You've got more space on it, so there's a lot of custom functions, but also a lot of dedicated buttons, and that is nice. You don't have to remember which custom button you programmed ISO to, for example. And it does have a really nice fully articulating screen. Works great when you're behind the camera. When you're in front of it though, like I am right now, you might run into some issues. I have a wireless receiver on top of the camera and I actually can't see the screen, so I'm kind of trusting Chris to tell me if I'm in focus or it's framed properly. Now on top of that, this does have the new menus from Sony.
And they're a big improvement from what we saw in the A99 and a lot of the A7 series cameras. But it does still have some issues, like having picture profile in what's essentially the photos menu, the first camera page. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it is certainly an improvement. I still think Sony has a bit of room to work on their menu design though. It's kind of funny because when people talk about video on the SLTs, the first thing they go to is the autofocus. And you can see some samples here. It is very good. Now, you have a joystick for selecting your focus point. I do still wish they put a touch screen on this, would have made things even better. But it's a nice system, especially when you're using the EVF. However, this has been a problem with the SLTs for quite a while. If you're using video autofocus, you're restricted to f3.5. Which really limits you creatively in terms of what you're doing. I wish they would pull this restriction off, or at least give you the option of contrast detect autofocus so you can at least set up your shot with, maybe a bit of hunting in the focus, but something very, very accurate, and choose your aperture. Unfortunately, they don't, and that is a big drawback to these. I just don't think the SLTs were ever designed for professional video use, and that's kind of how I feel about this camera. It's very good. If you buy this as a stills camera and are looking for separate video functionality, you'll really like the quality that comes from it, but the lens mount and that SLT design is really what restricts this for a lot of uses, and for that reason, I can't recommend it as a dedicated video camera.
All right, so the Sony A99 Mark II, my final impressions. This has been an interesting camera because we've shot it over such a long period, playing with different features and looking at it. And that's essential because I think my first big takeaway on this camera is that it is such a technological marvel. We're talking about an incredibly large sensor, big files, lots of throughput, fast shooting. The A99 Mark II, it's designed for basically anything that you want to do. Decent video quality, great sports shooting, excellent balance with the heavyweight for long lenses if you're doing wildlife, and it's a rugged, well-sealed camera. Overall, only kind of downsides I could really say that I disliked on the camera. It was still a little bit slow with that lag. When I turn wheels and I have to wait for aperture and shutter speed and ISO to catch up, that's a bit of a pain. And again, the larger size for the kind of shooting that I do, which is more street-based, is a detriment for sure. The biggest thing is going to be, is this camera past its prime? Is this mount a dead mount? The A99 Mark II focus is very quick. I could see a lot of people enjoying that, but now that we've got the Sony A9 out on the market, that particular camera outfocuses this in a lot of ways. Now I know it's not 42 megapixels, it's only 24, but it's really a sign of the times that Sony is now committing themselves to powerful E-mount cameras. They're going to take over the SLR world, and that's unfortunately going to kill the A99 Mark II. I really want to think of this camera as a delicate and beautiful swan song to the A-mount from Sony to its loyal users. But honestly, folks, unless you're really okay with the big heavy camera, I would hold on to your money and I would look at some of these new A9 series cameras that are inevitably going to come out. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. There's a lot of info to pass out on the 99 Mark II. Don't forget, talk to us on Twitter, check out our Instagram feed, subscribe to our channel. Let us know if you think that this is a now defunct system or if maybe Sony's going to keep surprising with new A-mount cameras. Either way, it's going to be exciting to see what happens in the future. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.